Hello, I am Raymond Shadow. Imagine this, you are in a dark cave. The only source of light comes from behind you. But you have never seen this light directly. That's because you, and everyone you know, have been chained your entire lives. For a prisoner in this cave, his perspective leads him to believe that he is the only thing that exists, and the flickering shadows on the wall are the only real things in the world. Suddenly, you are able to look around, perhaps even move. You see a fire burning behind you. Beside the fire, there are people using the light to cast shadows on the wall, just like a puppet show. You once thought the entire world was this dance of shadows, but now you learn that the world is far more than that. This is Plato's famous allegory of the cave. In this allegory, Socrates says this is the necessary path for the soul to ascend to the intelligible world. When you break your chains and begin to climb upward, you might feel pain. The sunlight outside is blinding, making you want to retreat back to that boring but safe cave. But as time passes, you begin to adapt, to understand what the world is truly like. You are no longer satisfied with that world of shadows, that world of pure appearance. This story is not only the core metaphor of Plato's thought, it is the starting point of our journey today. If you've heard of Plato, you've likely heard of this cave. But if we want to truly understand this allegory, we need to understand the grand picture of Plato's entire philosophy. Today, we are going to explore this founder of Western philosophy and how he attempted to lead us out of that cave. In all of written philosophy, especially if we look strictly at Western philosophy, it is hard to find a figure more important than Plato. There is a famous saying, the safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. Footnotes. Just footnotes. That might sound like an exaggeration. But there is profound truth to that comment. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why that was said. Plato left behind 27 dialogues, essentially 27 full-length books. Faced with such a vast ocean of work, trying to synthesize everything is incredibly difficult. I don't think you're listening to this content to become a curator at a Plato museum one day. No one cares what the guy's favorite color was. So, we will focus on those core ideas, the discussions about justice, truth, and the destiny of our souls. Let's go back to Plato's life. In 399 BC, Plato experienced a massive heartbreak. He watched in horror as his teacher, friend, and mentor, Socrates, was tried and sentenced to death. He was powerless to stop it. He was angry at the city of Athens, and rightfully so. The mentality of political persecution following the Peloponnesian War killed his best friend. He decided then and there that he needed a change of scenery. It turned out to be a 12-year change of scenery. He left the city in low spirits and went on a long road trip. During his travels, he learned a lot about the world and a few things about himself. It was a transformative road trip that changed the way he viewed the world for the rest of his life. You could almost view this trip as an extension and completion of his education. He had studied under Socrates for a long time, learning the Socratic method and debate. Then, like many college students, he studied abroad. He studied under Euclid, Theodorus, and the Pythagoreans. Some say he even went all the way to Egypt. What happened next is still debated. Some sources say he was captured near the end of his trip and sold into slavery, only to be saved by a friend. But what is certain is that for some reason, in 387 BC, he decided to return to Athens. He founded his famous school, the Academy. This school operated in some form for nearly 900 years. This is also where the modern word academic comes from. In this new school, he dedicated himself not only to compiling the thoughts of his beloved teacher Socrates but also to cultivating future philosophers. But Plato wasn't satisfied with the definition of the word philosopher. Do you remember Pythagoras' view that a philosopher is a lover of wisdom? That wasn't enough for Plato. He felt that to be a suitable candidate for his school, one needed more specific traits. Plato didn't like a definition of philosopher that included people who just liked hearing new facts. I'm sure we all know the type of person he's describing. Some guy goes to the grocery store, buys a bottle of Snapple, looks under the cap, and reads, "Did you know the human body is 80% water?" Then he goes around telling everyone. Aside from that annoying preaching of random trivia, Plato didn't think such a person should be considered a philosopher. Plato would view him as a tourist, or someone who loves wisdom for the spectacle, not for wisdom itself. Plato believed non-philosophers live in a dreamlike state. They see things they think are beautiful and naively believe these objects contain what beauty is. Plato believed that if they looked deeper, they would actually see beauty itself. He didn't think that as a philosopher, you should pursue wisdom just because you like indulging in daily trivia. A true philosopher is someone who uses their brain merely as a tool to reach the process of wisdom. Cultivating future philosophers through the school was only half of his initial plan. He was also dedicated to continuing the work of his friend and mentor, Socrates. He wrote the Apology, which was the story of Socrates' trial, defense, and conviction. But he was far from finished with preserving Socrates' reputation. You see, Plato is one of those brilliant philosophers who chose to write his works in an entertaining, even poetic way, trying to get people to listen to the ideas behind the stories. Many historians say his writing style is the best in all of ancient Greece, even better than famous poets like Homer and Hesiod. Even modern translations can keep your interest. It really is high-quality work. A big part of what makes it so entertaining is that he wrote it as a story, people just chatting about mundane things, and then eventually, unintentionally weaving in philosophical discussions about some abstract concept. Plato would use real people, real personalities who lived at the time, and use them as mouthpieces to convey his philosophy. A classmate of mine once told me that Plato's work is like crossover fan fiction. It's a great modern analogy. It's like a crazy fan wrote a short story where Edward and Bella from Twilight enroll in Hogwarts and play Quidditch with Harry Potter. Plato would have different philosophers and different public figures engage in conversations they never actually had. Sometimes he even made people talk who didn't live in the same era. Plato often needed a character in these stories, a character who could be seen by people as the archetypal wise man. Whenever this need arose, he would borrow the name of the smartest person he knew, Socrates. He consciously molded Socrates into a wise man in every book, so that the legacy Socrates left behind would be that of a wise man. It's a bit like how certain actors get typecast in modern movies. Like, if you see Michael Cera on the street, you immediately assume he is a meek, awkward person. That just shows he played that role very well in movies. Plato undoubtedly did this on purpose in Socrates' case. Unfortunately, this led to a bit of confusion. Socrates was a philosopher himself, but he never wrote anything down. So, by making him the main character of dialogues that were actually conveying Plato's philosophy, it's sometimes hard to distinguish which views are Socrates and which are Plato's own. Plato's writing is divided into 3 distinct periods. Each period marks a huge shift in Plato's way of thinking and the subjects he covered. In the early dialogues, he deals with issues Socrates specifically focused on. Not only that, but he tackles them in the way Socrates would use, the Socratic method. It's like he felt an obligation to carry on Socrates' legacy after his execution. But then, the Socrates in his writing starts tackling more issues of government and metaphysical claims. The fact that Socrates is a completely different person in one work compared to another shows Plato's progress as a philosopher. Honestly, it doesn't really matter, Socrates wouldn't be mad. Socrates wasn't the type of guy to have a set of unwavering beliefs. Remember? He strongly swore he knew nothing and was always trying to figure out the nature of things. What Plato succeeded in doing in this situation was keeping the spirit of Socrates alive, that spirit of constant change and constant questioning. An example of this continuation of Socrates and his approach to philosophy exists in one of Plato's early treatises called the Symposium. This is one of Plato's most famous works. Keep in mind, all the characters in this dialogue were written by Plato. Think about the sheer genius of this, that writing years later, he could so perfectly encapsulate every character and their reputation at the time. It's not like he had a court stenographer in the room. Try retelling a conversation you had 15 years ago and see how hard it is. The word symposium means a drinking party. Plato describes a lavish dinner party where, after eating, several people take turns standing in front of the group, trying to arrive at a profound, Socratic definition of the concept of love. Like, how does love begin? What is the ultimate goal of loving someone? There are all sorts of people at this dinner party, he wrote. There's the general Alcibiades, the playwright Aristophanes, and most notably, Socrates. As a playwright who wrote comedies, Aristophanes fittingly gives an explanation that is half humorous and half metaphorical. He tells a story that once upon a time, men and women were actually fused together. They had 2 heads, 4 arms, 4 legs, they were actually spherical. Apparently, we would roll around everywhere. Back then, there were apparently three genders: all male, all female, or androgynous. The all-male form was said to originate from the sun, the female from the earth, and the androgynous partners from the moon. Apparently, when we had 4 arms and rolled around, we were also a bit aggressive. We tried to take over the realm of the gods. Zeus was getting ready to throw lightning bolts at us and kill us all. But he didn't want to deprive humans of all the offerings and sacrifices they gave him. So he just set his lightning bolt to stun mode and split us in half. That way, they would get twice as many offerings as before. So Aristophanes calls sexual attraction or eros the human longing to find one's other half. This urge and feeling that binds people together is our way of trying to recover the other half that was taken away. Apparently, this is also why people often say they feel complete when they fall in love with someone. In other words, Aristophanes believes love is actually a quest, a pursuit to fill the void of what was once yours. Later in the dinner, Socrates disagrees with him. He agrees it is a quest, but he doesn't think we love something because it once belonged to us. He thinks we love something because we think it is beautiful or good. Socrates, as usual, breaks down the concept of love and tries to distill it into its essence. He claims his enlightening explanation of love came from a conversation he once had with an older priestess. He explains it like this: humans seek immortality. We cannot live forever, that's for sure, so we are all looking for substitute forms of immortality. Plato believes these substitutes boil down to one of 3 things. First is having children. A small part of you is passed on through them. Second is doing something truly notable that makes you famous and recorded in history. Third, you can create works that are evergreen, which future generations will view as sublime. Just like Plato's Symposium, ironic, isn't it? Whether it's physical offspring created with someone you love, or intellectual offspring where we use the desire to be loved to motivate us to achieve. It's like we are peacocks, our intellectual achievements are the colorful feathers we add to our tails. We want love from these people, we think they are beautiful. But to Plato, they are just poor copies of the form of beauty. His saying that the things we choose to accomplish in life, careers, cars, kids, we do it all out of a love for beauty, which we then translate into motivation to do things. I know some of you will say, that's not love, that's lust. You're right. Plato thinks this is just the first step on the ladder of love. Love can be broken down into several different stages, ultimately culminating in the appreciation of the form of beauty itself. It starts with the love of a person's body. This is sexual attraction or just thinking someone is attractive. He says after a while, you eventually realize that the person you think is beautiful has a lot in common with all the other people you think are beautiful. Therefore, this makes this incredibly sexy person less precious than a rare Pokemon. Once you realize this, you realize that the differences a physical body can possess that make it beautiful are nothing compared to the differences that make a soul beautiful, or for us moderns, simply put, their personality. Then, the yardstick you use to measure whether someone is beautiful depends entirely on their character. Eventually, you start to transcend character and stop loving the individual inhabiting the individual body. You begin to love broader things, like concepts themselves. You fall in love with art, or law, or biology, things like that. Finally, at the top of the ladder, you fall in love with the form of beauty itself. Socrates says if one could live anywhere, it would be at the top of the ladder. Because when you fall in love with a single human, you are vulnerable. They might leave you, they might die. It is a life of painful enslavement to this person. But by falling in love with the form of beauty itself, you will never feel vulnerable. Because it is eternal and unchanging, it will never abandon you. But the problem is, it will never love you back. It is a perfect, eternal structure, it does not need love. This is what is called platonic love. It's not just about looking for a life partner. It was also originally intended to be used to examine the surface attributes of things. Do these things just look beautiful or have substance? Like if I dressed up like a tough UFC fighter with all the gear. But if you look closely at me, you'd find I have no idea how to fight, because there is no substance behind the appearance. Eventually, Plato got tired of dealing only with moral questions. He started trying to answer the questions that the pre-Socratic philosophers tried to answer, namely, what is the universe made of and where did it come from? It's kind of funny that he came to the same conclusion about morality in the universe. He believed that concepts like justice and beauty are eternal, not defined by the perception of the person seeing them. He believed that nature and the things we see are exactly the same. They are eternal, unchanging, and not based on our perception. Plato agreed with Socrates that finding the eternal definition of things is crucial. Because if you don't even know the definition of the concept you are philosophizing about, how can you accurately philosophize about it? How can you talk about justice without knowing what justice actually is? For Plato, the whole process of trying to find the definitions of these things should be done through the Socratic method. No malice intended, just giving guesses based on experience and letting the other person pick holes in them. But he also raised a question. This might have been asked after years of frustration wondering about the essence of things. If we ever actually arrived at the perfect definition, how would we recognize it? Not just the perfect form of moral concepts, but the perfect form of everyday objects? I mean, what exactly is bread? What exactly is an orange? Is there a perfect definition of the essence of an orange? Plato believed that just as there is an elusive version of justice, there is also an elusive perfect version of an orange, or all physical objects. A perfect orange. And all the oranges we see around us are just poor copies of that perfect orange. When we see an orange, we know it is an orange. Even though all oranges are very different, no two are the same. One might be a bit rounder, or have a random spot there. Some oranges might even differ greatly in color and taste. But we still recognize it as an orange because it has a certain orangeness. Of course, Plato decided to use a tree as his example back then. We recognize this tree-ness on some level and attach a definition to the tree. If we analyze the essence of a tree long enough, we can conceive of the perfect tree. But does it actually exist anywhere in the world? No. Plato believed that perfect tree, along with the perfect forms of everything else that exists, including concepts of justice and beauty, exists in a magical world of forms. This world is completely separate from the material world we live in. Humans cannot see, smell, or touch the world of forms. But they can think hard and long about the definitions of these things and access the world of forms through reason. Not only that, for Plato, the world of forms is the true reality. And the entire world we live in and everything in it, including people, trees, and dogs, are just poor copies of the archetypal things that exist in the world of forms. This concept is known as his theory of forms. This is a very strange way of looking at the world and everything in it. To explain this concept, Plato used the famous analogy of the divided line. Imagine a line divided into two unequal parts. One is larger than the other. The smaller part represents the visible world. This consists of two smaller sections. The first section represents images, like shadows and reflections. The second section represents the things those images represent, like animals or plants. The larger part of the line represents the world of ideas. That larger part itself is divided into things known through inference, and things known through reason or understanding. That final category is truly the realm of philosophy. Because when you start to understand things, you are reasoning back to first principles and away from assumptions. You no longer rely on things like the fleeting world of appearances. So philosophers possess the path to this higher realm of knowledge. They can know things about the real world, that is, knowledge of the forms. Whereas most people are content knowing knowledge about things that are merely appearances. Or accepting many assumptions about the world without questioning them. This is also the true meaning of the allegory of the cave. When Plato describes humans living in an underground cave watching shadows on the wall, he is describing our daily experience. We think those shadows are reality, but they are just illusions cast by reality. The philosopher is the one who breaks the chains and climbs out of the cave. He sees the sun outside, sees things as they truly are. That is, entering the intelligible world and seeing the forms themselves. It's like watching a Champions League final sitting next to a professional soccer player. You are both watching the same game, but he sees much more than you do. He understands nuances and strategies that you are completely ignorant of. Plato believed that true wisdom can do this for everything we see in the world. Being able to unlock seeing truth as it really is, giving a person a unique perspective of understanding. But there is an obvious problem with his theory of forms. How could we possibly know what the ideal form of anything is? How do we know if we are reasoning out an imperfect tree or the perfect tree? Plato says that although we don't realize it, we are born possessing knowledge of everything in the world of forms. Or as he put it, what we call learning is just a process of recollection. He believed that humans can be divided into two separate parts, body and soul. The body is responsible for the inferior senses. We use it to perceive the world in a flawed way. On the other hand, the soul has the ability to reason. We use the soul to perceive the world of forms. He believed our souls are eternal. Before we were born, they lived in the world of forms, and they really want to go back. So when we see a tree with our senses, we recognize it as a tree. But we need to use our soul or reason to recollect what a tree actually is. This idea that learning is just a process of recollection is called his theory of innate knowledge. He told a story purportedly proving this is true. The story is about Socrates talking to his friend Meno, while teaching a slave boy who knew nothing about math. Socrates wants to help the boy recall the knowledge he was born with. In the dialogue, Socrates doesn't teach the kid anything. He just keeps asking him questions. Socrates asks if he can calculate the length of the side of a shape without being taught. The boy answers incorrectly at first, thinking double the area means double the side length. But under Socrates' guidance, he corrects his own mistake. Socrates says to Meno, "See, I didn't teach him. Watch him recall things in order now, as one must recall." The boy eventually arrives at the correct conclusion on his own. He continues for a while, never teaching the boy anything. Just asking questions, letting the boy come to new conclusions entirely on his own. This is a great example of the Socratic method in action. And a great example of Socrates as a midwife of ideas. In this story, you can really see that the boy didn't know what the answer was before the questions. Then Socrates birthed new ideas. Just like he claimed to do when questioning people on the streets of Athens. Plato believed this story proved that we are born with knowledge. It proved we are born with total knowledge of everything in the world of forms. And understanding the world of forms is just a process of using your soul's reasoning ability to recall them. The theory of forms might seem a bit weird. That's because it is weird. If you gave Plato enough time, he might agree with you. The theory went through several different phases. Certain aspects of it changed throughout his life, undoubtedly because other philosophers would argue with him about it. He would realize there were problems and try to adjust to explain them. But he was the first person to designate what the path to possessing true knowledge was. He was responding to the relativist views of the sophists. This led him to base thought on eternal things like the theory of forms. But this was a breakthrough in epistemology. Simply put, epistemology is what do we know and how do we know it. Plato's explanation really set him apart. Because of this, he is often considered to have single-handedly laid the foundation for 17th century rationalism. Plato wasn't done changing philosophy yet. He even had a lot to say about the role of government in a civilized society. This brings us to his grandest work, the Republic. In the Republic, Socrates proposes that we describe an ideal city-state. He says, "We say there is justice in the individual. But I think there is also justice in the entire city-state. Perhaps justice would be on a larger scale." He proposes we build that city from scratch and then see what the ideal city has in common with the individual. We are using analogical reasoning here. This should give us a better understanding of what justice is in general. Because we say, as goes the just city, so goes the just individual. Plato was an aristocratic elitist who hated democracy. Socrates' conviction probably exacerbated this. But his idea was, just as there are ideal forms of justice or beauty, Plato says there is an ideal form of government. He constructs a utopia, detailing what the ideal government should look like and why. The biggest problem he saw was usually the people elected into leadership. He explained why leaders never seem to get things done. Because those born into a life of indulgent wealth are, in Plato's eyes, the worst candidates to rule the population. Plato's idea for the ideal city starts at the beginning of the Republic. The character Socrates meets a man named Thrasymachus. Thrasymachus tells Socrates that morality is nothing more than the advantage of the stronger. He represents a view we can roughly describe as might makes right. He believes if you can break the law and get away with it, you should. If you can change the rules and make a group of people follow them, you should do that too. He concludes by saying that a person who behaves morally is always worse off than a person who behaves immorally. Or in modern terms, nice guys finish last. This sparked a fierce debate. Socrates didn't say much at the time, but after Thrasymachus left, Glaucon joined the conversation. Glaucon didn't fully defend might makes right. Instead, he wanted to argue that injustice, that is, behaving immorally, is preferable to behaving justly or morally. He says we choose to be good because we are trying to win social approval. We are only good when it is convenient for us or it is a rational choice. We don't choose good for good itself. To illustrate this, Glaucon cites the myth of the ring of Gyges. Imagine a shepherd finds a ring. This ring, when turned a certain way, grants him the power of invisibility. This might sound a bit like the One Ring in Lord of the Rings. In the story, once the shepherd discovers the ring and its power, his soul begins to be corrupted. He starts committing unjust acts. He even goes to murder the king and usurps the throne. Glaucon says this is a powerful argument proving that no one is voluntarily just, but only under compulsion. Everyone believes injustice is more profitable to the individual than justice. This is the challenge Socrates needs to overcome. We need to define justice, and we need to argue why justice is preferable to injustice. The way Socrates explains it is not by pointing out the merits of a just individual, but the merits of a just state. He says it will be easier to understand if looked at on a broader scale. Plato not only has to point out what the ideal form of government is but also prove why behaving morally is in your own self-interest. Solving two massive tasks that have plagued human genius to this day, in a single work. By the way, Plato is God tier. First, Plato defines what the ideal city needs. It needs a police force to protect it from invaders. Then he goes on to say everyone should work in the field that best highlights their individual talents. For example, if you are naturally good at math, you work in the math field. If you are naturally good at art, you be an artist. This is known as the definition of justice in the Republic. Justice is the business of everyone doing their own job. The focus will be defining what the city needs, and then finding a group that can specifically meet that need. Honestly, I know we are talking about utopia and this isn't necessarily feasible in the real world, but wouldn't this benefit society immensely? It really makes you wonder how many super geniuses who could have cured diseases ended up as dishwasher managers at Taco Bell. Socrates establishes that the city is built to satisfy people's needs. He says our basic city will need a farmer, a builder. Each of these people must serve a specific function. Socrates says it is inappropriate for any of these people to spend time on other tasks. So the builder does all the building, the doctor does all the medical work. This initial city is simple, it has no luxuries. Socrates describes this initial city like this: people will produce bread, wine, clothes, and shoes. They will build houses for themselves, working in the summer lightly clad and barefoot. They can live well like this. They and their children, drinking wine after meals, wearing garlands on their heads, singing praises to the gods. They will live happily with one another. But Glaucon rejected this city. He said it wasn't good enough. In fact, he said it was more suitable for animals. He said if you were organizing a city of pigs, wouldn't you feed them like this? So Glaucon wants to introduce luxury into the city. Although Socrates calls this first city the true city, he decides to humor Glaucon and expand the city. This is a very strange turn in the book. He says, then again, we must expand our city because our initially healthy city is no longer big enough. We have to fill it with a multitude of things. For example, we must have all sorts of hunters, artists, and those who use music, poets, and their assistants. More importantly, we will need more service staff like tutors, nurses, barbers. Besides that, we also need swineherds. As we expand to this second city, we will need a soldier class. We can't just let citizens be soldiers because everyone has only one task. We will discuss the soldier class and the governance of the seemingly ideal city later. But notice what happened here. Socrates offered a description of an ideal city, and Glaucon said it wasn't truly ideal because it wasn't pleasant enough. This might be a key turning point in the Republic. Was Socrates serious when he described the first city as ideal? If that is true, what does that mean for the rest of the book? Is that much more complex city actually not an ideal city? Is it all built on Glaucon missing the point? I think that's an interesting question worth pondering. To properly defend this expanded city, we will have a class known as the Guardians. The Guardians will be freed from all necessities. They will focus only on the highest level of training. These Guardians are compared multiple times to purebred dogs. They must be both high-spirited and gentle. They are hostile to anything unfamiliar but very gentle to what they know. This leads to a discussion on education and censorship. Socrates says stories must be strictly controlled, especially if it leads them astray. They won't believe the right things about the gods. Plato seems somewhat concerned with proving that philosophers, especially his teacher Socrates, actually truly valued the gods. Socrates says even if some stories about the gods might be true, they must also be regulated. Not just stories. We eventually see that the guardians are essentially part of a breeding program. An early form of eugenics. We learn they cannot acquire land or build nice houses. They cannot own things like gold and silver. This even includes their wives and children. All guardians will live a communal life with no private property. All these precautions are taken so they have nothing to corrupt themselves with. The only motivation should be the improvement of the state. You might wonder if the guardians can truly be happy. But Socrates says the happiness of the individual or a specific class is not the issue. He says the guardians exist to produce a happy city. If we give the guardians the wrong life, they are no longer guardians. A city without a guardian class is simply no longer a city. This is for the sake of overall harmony. To ensure all this works properly, Plato introduces an extremely important concept. This is the noble lie. It is a lie told by the rulers to everyone for the sake of the city's harmony. You are all brothers, our story will tell everyone in the city, but when God created you, he mixed gold into the creation of those suitable to be rulers. That is why they are the most precious. He used silver for those who are auxiliaries, helpers, and iron and bronze for farmers and other skilled workers. The first and most important instruction God gave to the rulers is that they should become the best guardians, watching the mixture of these metals in the souls of children. If their own child is born with a mixture of bronze or iron, they must not feel pity for him. He must be cast out to join the ranks of skilled workers or farmers. On the other hand, children born from those groups mixed with gold or silver should be recognized and promoted. This noble lie is designed to help the city function. It lets people know there is a specific place for them in the function and order of this city. If the city falls apart, it's because the wrong type of person came to rule. But this should make you feel a bit strange. Because if we are trying to establish that reason should rule, it's a bit odd that Plato seems to think you must believe certain lies to achieve this. Does this mean the order of the soul is also maintained by noble lies? Are there lies we tell ourselves that enable us to do the right thing? Of course, if a lie must be told to keep the city running, someone in the city needs to tell that lie first. That person is the ruler of the city, the one with the right to lie. That person is the philosopher king. Socrates says unless philosophers become kings in our cities, or those now called kings and rulers become true philosophers, there will be no end to the troubles of our cities. Nor, I suspect, for the human race. Unless political power and philosophy are merged into one. This sounds like an extremely elitist, even somewhat authoritarian view. But before we judge, let's go back to the core question. What is all this for? It's to define justice. After constructing such a complex city structure, Socrates finally gives the definition of justice. He says justice is the business of everyone doing their own job. This might sound a bit disappointingly simple. We were expecting some grand moral imperative. Instead, Plato tells us justice is just everyone staying in their lane. But there is a deeper meaning here. Plato says this is the ideal form of the city, specialization. Everyone exerts their natural talents and abilities to their highest potential. Remember the analogical reasoning we did earlier? We built the city to see the individual soul clearly. Socrates argues that a just city is one where all its parts work well together. This can be compared to a person whose parts all work well together. Just as the city has three classes, the human soul has three parts. First is the appetitive part. This part craves sex or money. This compares to the producer class in the city, farmers, craftsmen, who live to make money. Second is the spirited part. This part wants honor, fame, or notoriety. This compares to the auxiliary guardian class, they fight for glory. Finally, the rational part. This part desires knowledge. This compares to the ruling class. This is Plato's anatomy of the soul. Who is the best person? The answer is the person with a balanced soul. The rational part of the soul focuses on truth, the spirited part on honor, and the appetitive part on pleasure. Nothing should seize disproportionate power or break the balance. That would be an immoral or evil way of life. Socrates compares the ideal state of the city to the ideal state of the human. A person should not let themselves be controlled by the desire for sex, food, fame, or glory. They should make decisions based on reason. This is why the city should be ruled by reason, or ruled by those raised to be purely rational thinkers. This is why we need the philosopher king. Because only the philosopher represents the rational part of the city. The philosopher can rule because he possesses certain character traits that make him the ideal candidate. Socrates says the philosopher is someone who falls in love with the whole of reality. He possesses traits like honesty, self-discipline, magnificence, courage, etc. Plato believed this wisdom earned them the stamp of a ruler. In his view, who is more fit to rule than those who understand the exact definitions of moral values? Rather than letting flawed people rule everyone, people who always impose their biased, usually corrupt views on the populace, why not let someone who sees absolute truth steer the ship? But there is a huge paradox here. Being a philosopher or a philosopher king is hard. Because the philosopher is not at ease in this world. To explain this, Socrates uses a brilliant analogy of a ship. This is the famous ship of state. Imagine a ship owner who is taller and stronger than everyone else. But he is also nearsighted and lacks knowledge. Socrates describes his knowledge as matching his eyesight. So he doesn't know much, just like he can't see far. The sailors on the ship begin to fight over who should be captain. Maybe it seems the ship owner isn't particularly good at his job, but all the sailors think each of them could do better. They all think they should be captain. They try to do whatever they can to get the ship owner to step down or hand over power so one of them can become captain. They might even resort to violence. Socrates says they beg him and do everything possible to make him hand over the tiller. Eventually, they bind the ship owner and seize control. When they are so happy, they start drinking and feasting. And they sail terribly. They seem to have an impression that anyone good at persuading others is a good captain. They confuse the art of persuasion or seizing power with the art of navigation. Anyone who can't persuade others is called useless. If we refuse to listen, do you really think you can persuade us? I think Plato believed most people would simply refuse to listen. They would think someone like a philosopher is useless. Because Socrates says the true captain must possess things like knowledge of the stars. They must understand the seasons and winds and anything else relevant to sailing. But the kind of person who acquires this knowledge is usually called a stargazer. And stargazing is typically viewed as useless to some extent. This appeared early in the history of philosophy. The philosopher Thales was also an astronomer. Actually, in the Theaetetus, Plato tells a story about Thales. It says Thales was studying the stars, gazing at the sky, and fell into a well. Then a Thracian maidservant made fun of him, saying he was crazy. Especially because he wanted to know about the heavens when he couldn't even see what was at his feet. Thales was so focused on higher things, on the heavens, that he couldn't understand what was happening around him. People mocked him because they thought what he did was useless. This story even made it into one of Aesop's fables. The philosopher or scientist is seen as useless or unworthy or worthy of mockery. But Plato says no, actually, they would make the best kings. When Thales looks up and ignores the world around him, he is learning better things. And the person learning better things is best suited to rule daily life. This is exactly the philosopher king's dilemma. He has left the cave and seen the sunlight outside, that is, the intelligible world and the forms. Although the intelligible world is far preferable to this world of appearances full of vanity, the philosopher king must sacrifice his enjoyment of the intelligible world and go back into the cave to rule. It's like the philosopher king is someone who can come to rule because he knows all this nonsense we spend our days on is just that, nonsense. And the philosopher doesn't care about that nonsense. Since the philosopher doesn't care about that nonsense, or can see through it, he will make a very suitable king. Plato believed the less excited people are to become leaders, the better things will turn out. An aristocracy is ruled by philosopher kings, thus governed by wisdom and reason. This is the ideal regime in Plato's mind, aristocracy. That's ancient Greek elitism rearing its head again. It is a city ruled by its better elements. The virtue of the city lies in the willingness of the rest of the city to be ruled. This is the just and harmonious operation of the ideal city. I know you might guess that I think this is an unappealing way to view politics. But when you consider it applied to your own soul, applied to you personally, it becomes a little more appealing. The aristocratic person is one who allows the better elements of the soul to rule the rest of the soul. Socrates did say there is a one-to-one correspondence between these types of regimes and types of people. So when we look at the types of regimes, we will actually see 5 different ways you can live. He thinks we should all strive to be spiritually aristocratic. People with balanced souls. Reason focuses on truth, spirit on honor, appetite on pleasure. But this ideal city might eventually deteriorate. Socrates seems to say it will slowly worsen. Starting from aristocracy, we will turn into a timocracy. But then you continue to degenerate. That is when you turn into an oligarchy, then into a democracy, and finally tyranny. There are 5 main types of regimes. They are in a hierarchy from best to worst. These 5 in order are aristocracy, the best, degrading into timocracy, then oligarchy, then democracy, finally tyranny. The meanings of these 5 government types are far from their modern definitions. But there are enough similarities for us to understand what he means. Let's see how this process of degeneration happens. Due to errors by the ruling class, the city changes from aristocracy to timocracy. Remember I said guardians are a product of eugenics? Someone is responsible for their breeding to ensure only gold individuals become the ruling class. But Socrates says through some strange math, eventually, there will be a guardian who doesn't fully understand the rules. Mistakes happen, there will be unwise unions. Children will not have the correct nature. So people not truly worthy of holding power will be admitted into the ruling class. To put it bluntly, the eugenics program fails. This will lead to the city being governed improperly, and the city's values will change. Eventually, this turns into a timocracy. Timocracy is a regime that loves honor. And the timocratic individual is also someone who loves victory and honor. Socrates says a son becomes timocratic by being the son of a good father living in a poorly governed state. If you put it in very American terms, you would say the father is a chump, and people know he's a chump. So he feeds the rational element of his soul trying to do the right thing. But he keeps losing in worldly status games. His son sees this and becomes timocratic instead of aristocratic. His son starts to value those status games and starts pursuing honor. He might want to degenerate into something more extreme. But he finds himself torn because he also admires his father. That's why he ends up in the middle as a timocratic figure. This form of government is also known as a military dictatorship. This was actually Sparta's government system at the time. But timocracy is very unstable. It will continue to decay further and turn into oligarchy. Oligarchy is roughly a city ruled by the rich. Socrates describes it as having a property qualification for ruling the city. This is already far from the ideal city. Because the rulers of the ideal city own nothing. In an oligarchy, only those who are rich and prosperous can rule. As the rich are able to accumulate more and more wealth, oligarchy might arise naturally. But Socrates says the more they value money, the less they value virtue. The ruling class isn't ambitious or competitive like you find in timocracy, where everyone cares about honor and status. Instead, in an oligarchy, they just love money. The problem with oligarchy should be fairly obvious. Because money is at best an imperfect proxy for wisdom. At worst, it is a reverse indicator. So wise men are not actually ruling the city. And a city not governed by wise men is not governed well. And Socrates says this city has another major failure. This type of city is destined to be 2 cities, not one. A city of the poor and a city of the rich living in the same place. But constantly plotting against each other. Literally, the rich and poor don't even consider themselves living in the same society. So if you are thinking about overall harmonious operation being the mark of a healthy city, then oligarchy is far from virtue at this point. Correspondingly, the oligarchic person is someone who loves money, is stingy, and selfish. Imagine the son of a timocratic man seeing his father suffer in the world. Maybe he was a general, very honorable, but he was dragged to court and executed. The son starts reasoning that the way to protect himself is to accumulate power in the form of wealth. This will allow him to thrive in this society. He lives in fear of meeting his father's fate. This means he is becoming obsessed with his desires and his greedy elements. he lets his desires make decisions for him. So we can say the king of his soul is greed, while the rational and spirited parts of his soul are subordinate. This form of government is doomed to fail. Because eventually, class struggle will break out. The rich will fight the poor. And the poor always outnumber the rich. So what inevitably happens next is the poor revolt. Oligarchy degenerates into democracy. Democracy appears when people start looking at the ruling class and see that they are just subjects for us to pick off. They see them as a fragile group you can easily overthrow. The poor will stage a revolution. When they win, they will kill their opponents and exile them. Then they will divide the city into equal shares. This is when you establish a democracy. We think of democracy as the pinnacle of human freedom. In fact, when we talk about a free society, we usually mean a liberal democratic society. But Socrates does not believe democracy is true freedom. Therefore, he thinks democracy is the most attractive regime. It will be attractive or beautiful like a colorful coat because it will be made up of so many different colors. All of these represent a variety of moral decorations, which is the phrase he uses. But the attractive features of democracy mask the reality of the situation. Then comes this city's tolerance, no pedantic insistence on details. Instead, a complete contempt for the kind of respect we showed when building the city. Our claim was that only someone who understands nature can be a good person. And only if he played in the right environment from early childhood. How grandly the city tramples all this underfoot. Paying no attention to what kind of life someone led before entering political life. Anyone can win favor just by saying they are a friend of the people. When Glaucon hears this, he gives a somewhat sarcastic comment, saying, "Ah yes, truly noble." The democratic individual is raised by oligarchic parents. But like all sons, he tends to rebel. He finds he likes pursuing pleasure, he throws off restraints. Eventually, he has a war within himself. He doesn't know which part of himself truly rules, his desires even start fighting each other. The democratic individual is essentially anarchic. Meaning there is no longer a hierarchy in the soul. Eventually, Socrates says democracy turns into tyranny. So the insatiable greed for freedom actually leads democracy to destroy itself. This is similar to how the insatiable greed for wealth eventually destroyed oligarchy. Think of it this way, unless what you truly love is wisdom, the thing you grow to love will eventually be your undoing. This might be a big lesson of the Republic. The idea of being ruled seems inconsistent with democracy. This implies that the true form of democracy inevitably leads to anarchy. So magistrates are condemned, those who follow rules are mocked. I mean, who are you? Like, why should you listen to someone telling you what to do? Sons even start thinking they don't need to obey their fathers. To the Greek mind, that was a true sign of moral decay. Socrates says the probable reaction to excessive freedom is excessive slavery. Thus, we have tyranny. Of course, to have tyranny, you must have a tyrant. The people will turn to a single individual whom Socrates calls a champion. From this trend, a tyrant will emerge. Once the people's champion wins, he has no restraints. So he can appease the masses with promises. He will say, "I'm going to cancel your debts, I'm going to redistribute land." Then he will exile his enemies. He will also start giving in to his own desires because no one tells him what to do. He certainly cannot govern himself. Anyone else with any form of power will be seen by the tyrant as a potential enemy. So he will view them with suspicion. The tyrant knows he must be a wolf, or he will be destroyed. The tyrant starts out friendly. Socrates describes them with a smile on their lips. But they start hunting down all the wise and good people. That's because the wise and good prove to be a threat to the tyrant's rule. The tyrant can never truly be happy because he is constantly under threat. How does the democratic man turn into a tyrannical man? Socrates says we all have a class of terrible, untamed, lawless desires. Everyone has these desires, even people who seem completely normal. These are desires usually revealed to us in our dreams. The son of the democratic man is introduced to lawlessness or freedom. To control this son more, those seducing this son implant a master passion or desire in him. They think if they can give him this desire or passion for something, he will be easier to manipulate. So just as tyranny has a champion, the tyrant has a champion in his soul. A specific desire that rules all other desires and eventually rebels against the rest of the soul. At the top of tyranny is the tyrant. A champion of the people, once victorious, has no restraints. As the champion grows, he takes madness as his bodyguard. He begins to kill the rational and sensible parts of the soul. The democratic man becomes tyrannical. He even starts turning against those around him, including his own parents. Now they rule his soul. His soul has completely lost harmony, there is no sense of proportion. Soon, even he himself cannot control it. A tyrannical person actually lacks a sense of control. These people commit major crimes like theft or burglary. They rob temples or kidnap others. Socrates also says they are the type responsible for malicious prosecution. This seems to be a nod from Plato to the ultimate fate of Socrates being prosecuted in Athens. The tyrant even starts punishing their own city if they don't comply. Everything else is subordinated and punished. Of course, this throws everything out of harmony. A soul or a city cannot function properly in this way. The tyrant as an individual is enslaved. Socrates says he is poor and insatiable. And a tyrant, this worst imaginable person, is, Socrates says, the most unhappy person. So through all this giant digression about the city, I think it suddenly makes sense. Because Socrates has just finished his proof. Or he is really close to finishing his proof, that justice is better than injustice. He showed that the person who completely disregards morality, the tyrant, is ultimately unhappy. He will constantly worry about his life. He will live in fear. He will lack self-control. He actually cannot do anything worth doing. We can say the unjust man is a degeneration from the aristocrat in the soul, to someone who loves honor, to someone ruled by the love of money or power, to someone who allows these desires to overwhelm him, to someone ultimately ruled by a champion of fear in the soul. Therefore, he cannot be happy. By the way, when I first read this in the Republic, I was blown away. Because you lose that sense of the soul in parts of the book. Then suddenly, it becomes clear. Because there is a strange tension throughout the Republic. On one hand, Socrates occasionally argues we should ban poets from the city. He has two different reasons for this. One is that poets will mislead people. This means they will stir up wrong emotions or cause them to have wrong ideas. For example, poems and tragedies about how terrible the afterlife is might cause guardians to fear death. In that case, they won't be good at defending the city. To prevent people from being misled by poetry, we must either ban it completely or strictly censor it. But in the final book of the Republic, Socrates says it is very good that we ban poetry in the city. Because poetry is inherently misleading. The argument goes something like this: the philosopher has true knowledge of things as they are. Not just their appearances. In those metaphysical terms, we can say the philosopher possesses knowledge of the forms. While the craftsman, the person who builds things, is one step removed from the truth. They are copying the world of appearances. Then poets copy those copies. So Socrates says poetry is always at least 2 steps removed from the truth. So it cannot lead you to actual knowledge of the world. This sounds like some philosophical prejudice against art. But the second argument is weirder. I think it's also more interesting. Socrates says all imitative art, meaning it mimics reality, has a destructive influence on the mind unless those minds possess an antidote. That antidote is knowledge of what the world is truly like. The subtle implication is that philosophers can listen to poetry and enjoy poetry because they are unlikely to be led astray. They can avoid the poisonous influence of poetry. It's even funny to say that phrase. But they can avoid the poisonous influence of poetry. They can even appreciate its artistic features because they have proven themselves capable of appreciating the world as it is, not just its appearance. All these things become more complex when you realize myths and poetry are all over the Republic. The guardians of the ideal city are actually educated through myths. What we called the noble lie earlier is also called the myth of metals. It is a myth about individual nature. Thrasymachus's king, that is, the person overseeing the guardian's education, trades in myths to produce ideal results. And in the Republic, there is one more myth we haven't discussed. This is a myth that actually ends the book. This is some of the most interesting and desirable imagery in all of Plato's work. That is the myth of Ar. We'll get to that in a moment. Because before discussing that myth, there is one more thing. The focus of Book 10 of the Republic is caring for your soul. The lesson of Book 10 is actually the lesson of the entire Republic. You need to take care of your soul. The discussion about poetry is really just a prelude to this discussion. Poetry is banned because it distracts you or misleads you away from knowledge of how things actually are. This is bad for your soul. This might lead you to act unjustly. In Book 10, we see arguments for the immortality of the soul. Because we believe the soul is immortal. The soul is simple. The soul does not extend in space. The soul is indivisible. The soul cannot be destroyed by anything. The soul cannot destroy itself. The soul must be immortal. Your body might last maybe 70 years, or even 100. But your soul will last forever. So ensuring your soul is in good condition is always more important than your body being in good condition. What is 100 bad years compared to eternity? This is the conclusion at the very end of the Republic. It is also the completion of the argument Socrates basically started in Book 1 after all this. He wants to say justice is better than injustice because justice ensures the integrity or health of your soul. He uses a myth to illustrate this. That is the myth of Ar. Socrates tells the story of Ar, a man who died in battle. But when the bodies were collected from the battlefield, people noticed his body had not decayed. A few days later, his body was placed on a funeral pyre, and they went to light the fire. Just then, he woke up and told everyone what he saw in the afterlife. In modern translations, this is called a myth. I think that is a perfect way to describe it. It could also be called a speech or narrative. Socrates seems to present it like something he actually heard. But it seems to be a storyline invented by Plato. At the same time, he adopted themes from other ancient myths and stories. I think he made this up for the purpose of the Republic. We can try to keep this in mind when thinking about the myth of Ar. A soul left his body. It went on a journey with many other souls. Eventually, it arrived at this wonderful place. There were 2 holes in the ground and 2 holes in the sky. These holes corresponded to each other. Between those holes were judges. When souls approached the judges would either tell them to go to the left path, where they descended underground, or to the right path, where they ascended to heaven. When you are on the journey, you carry marks of all your past deeds. Just people carried them in front, unjust people carried them on their backs. However, Ar was not judged. He was taken across like a messenger for humanity. So the judges told him to watch closely. He saw some souls coming out of the holes too. Those coming out of the ground were dusty and thirsty. They looked like they had been through a rough journey. But those coming down from the sky were very clean, they were happy. But everyone seemed happy to return to this meadow. Those sentenced to go underground described a journey of about 1,000 years. While those who went to heaven described everything they experienced as beautiful and wonderful. It turns out unjust people were punished tenfold for all their deeds, while those just people enjoyed certain rewards. Some tyrants were so heinous that they were never allowed to come out of the ground. Socrates says the opening would refuse to let them pass. Whenever one of these tyrants approached, these openings would let out a huge roar. He describes savage, hideous men, sounding very much like the popular concept of demons, seizing these people, dragging them away, or binding their hands and feet, skinning them, and generally just torturing them. These people will be thrown into Tartarus. This is an element of early Greek cosmology that Plato incorporated into his myth. After staying in the meadow for a few days, the souls embarked on another journey. 4 days later, they approached a pillar of light running through the entire heaven and earth. The light is described as like a rainbow, but brighter and purer. The light actually holds heaven and the rotating firmament together. The travelers then saw what is called the spindle of necessity. We need to expand on the description of the spindle. It has many nested worlds. Each world has a different light speed and musical note. There are sirens singing, each world has a siren singing those notes. It forms this beautiful sound. What Plato is showing us is a mythical illustration of the workings of the universe. Souls who have completed their journey can see directly what the universe looks like. Then they met the daughters of necessity, Lachesis, Clotho, and Atropos, the Fates. They sing of the past, present, and future. What happens next is a precursor to reincarnation. These souls will need to choose a demon, guardian spirit. The demon will guard them as they go into the afterlife. Reincarnation is a belief that pre-existed in Greek cosmology and mythology. This demon will determine the course of their future life. A prophet tells them the choice they make makes them responsible. God is not responsible. So some souls hastily choose to try and seek power. They don't pay attention, or they don't see that they are actually choosing to commit terrible acts in the next life. This is why philosophy is important, Socrates says. It will enable you to choose the right way of life. You should ignore every other branch. He says, every other branch of study focuses only on the knowledge of living a good life. This is because ultimately your soul will have to make a choice. You will have to choose the middle path to avoid extremes like power and wealth. If you do this, you can possess the greatest happiness. After all souls decided, they went to the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, crossing the plain of oblivion. Then they drank those waters, which made them forget what they had seen. Then their souls scattered like shooting stars to their next birth. Er saw all this, and then he woke up. He wasn't allowed to drink the water. That was so he could see what the afterlife was like. So he could become a messenger for humanity. He woke up on the funeral pyre to tell people about this. So why did Socrates resort to the myth of why is that the ending of the Republic? I mean, the ending is arguably the most important part of a book. This is what most people will remember. Plato seems aware of the narrative form. Why not end with a really solid argument? A great argument with great premises and an interesting conclusion. I guess you could say why he chose to end with an inspiring story. Myth is a backup plan. If you weren't convinced by the life-changing arguments, maybe you'll be persuaded by a good myth. As Plato said in the Laws, sometimes philosophy fails to persuade people. So myths can charm people into agreement. Remember what we saw early in the Republic? What happens to those who don't want to be persuaded? Well, maybe they can be charmed by myth. So perhaps Socrates, and Plato by extension, recognized that not everyone would be fully convinced by what he said. Plato might have worried that there are people studying the dialogues who wouldn't be fully convinced they should live a good life, and that they should avoid becoming a tyrant. If Plato was partially trying to think about what a safe world for a philosopher would look like, he needed to stop the rise of tyrants. In this case, the myth of is basically the Republic's big, beautiful backup plan. If you aren't convinced by the actual arguments Plato gave throughout the Republic, then maybe you will be inspired by that myth or frightened by that myth. You will be scared into behaving justly. If the idea of choosing what your next life looks like sounds scary to you, then maybe you need to start correcting your behavior now. Think about all the myths we encountered in the Republic. The Ring of Gyges showed how power corrupts us, even if that wasn't Glaucon's intention when he first tried to introduce it. The myth of metals was perhaps to illustrate that there are certain better elements in our souls. We need to allow them to rule the lesser elements. All the myths might be there to motivate us to live a better life. The ending of the Republic seems to support this interpretation. Socrates ends the discussion by speaking directly to Glaucon. He gives one last inspiring speech. So it can be our salvation. Because if we believe it, we will pass through the river of forgetfulness in the right way without polluting our souls. If we listen to the advice, we will believe the soul is immortal, capable of coping with all evil and all good. We will always stick to the upward path and practice justice with wisdom as best we can. That way, we will be friends to ourselves and to the gods. Whether while we remain here, or when we carry off our prizes like victorious athletes in a victory parade. So here and in the 1,000-year journey we described, let us farewell. Here lies Plato's deepest insight. Every choice we make in this world is shaping our eternal soul. Philosophy is not just mental gymnastics. It is preparation for death, it is the care of the soul. When we face that spindle of the universe, facing the choice of destiny, it is not God who decides our fate, but our own wisdom. Those souls who rush to choose power, to become tyrants, often do so because they lack philosophical scrutiny. They didn't see that behind power lies the curse of eating one's own children. But the philosopher, the one who saw through the appearances, will choose a middle path, a path of justice. Because he knows that is the path to greatest happiness. The myth of is not just a horror story about the afterlife. It is a mirror reflecting our current lives. Every current decision is casting a vote for the next cycle. Are you unknowingly choosing to become a tyrant? Or are you struggling to climb out of the cave to see the real sunlight? This is not just the choice Glaucon faced, but the choice each of us faces. This myth tells us that justice itself is a reward because it keeps your soul healthy. And injustice itself is a punishment because it shatters your soul. Whether the afterlife exists, whether that 1,000-year journey is real, Plato is telling us one thing. Being a good person, being a just person, is in your own interest. This isn't just for the harmony of society. It is for the peace of your own soul. This is why Socrates spent such a long time constructing that ideal state. To debate, to tell stories, to describe that complex cosmic structure. All of this ultimately returns to the individual. It returns to you and me. How we spend this life, how we face death. How we stay awake in a world full of temptations and shadows. This is the true core of the Republic. It is not a political textbook. It is a guide to the care of the soul. A guide teaching us how to live like a philosopher in this imperfect world. When we close this book, that cave still exists, that fire is still burning. The shadows on the wall are still dancing. But maybe, just maybe, there is a little more strength in our hearts. A strength to break the chains and turn upward. We begin to understand that true freedom is not doing whatever we want, but being guided by reason. True happiness is not possessing power and wealth, but possessing a harmonious soul. This is the gift Plato left us. As I said at the beginning, it has been said that all subsequent Western philosophy is merely footnotes to Plato and his works. I think most people hearing this would immediately think it is extreme exaggeration. How could Plato foresee all the intellectual developments over 2,000 years? But it depends on how you interpret it. No, Plato didn't think of all the future philosophical breakthroughs in the early 3rd century BC. Even implying he did would be dishonest. You can't prove you aren't a brain in a vat, which is actually still some echo of Plato's cave allegory. Perhaps the true meaning of the quote is that the epistemological and metaphysical questions Plato raised all those years ago are analyzed and thought about over and over again by later philosophers. They raised their own questions and treatises based on these questions. You could even say philosophers today are still trying to answer the questions Plato originally raised all those years ago. Whether it is about what justice is, or about what we can know. Our discussions always seem to trace back to that square in Athens. Many of his works have found amazing relevance through the ages. His entire body of work was used by people like Plotinus and St. Augustine to build grand theological systems. I mean, just the allegory of the cave itself acts as a perfect metaphor. Lost in chains, forced to look around an inferior world. Then finally managing to untie yourself and find Jesus Christ, your personal Lord and Savior. He shines the light of absolute truth on you. See, this is the charm of a classic. It is like a multifaceted prism. Different eras and different people can see their own shadows in it. What do you think about Plato's idea that the world around us isn't exactly as it appears? Have you ever had an experience that changed your view on something, so much that you felt you were seeing it for what it really was for the first time? Like that prisoner walking out of the cave, seeing real trees and flowers under the sun for the first time. That dizziness, that pain. And the clarity and joy that followed. Perhaps that is the most precious experience philosophy brings us. That's all for our journey today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, it means a lot to me. I am Raymond, and I'll see you in the next episode.